Cold open. 3 critical Microsoft advisories landed in the same window, and they point to the same security lesson for every organization using enterprise AI. One advisory involves Microsoft 365 Copilot. One involves Azure OpenAI. One involves Microsoft Entra provisioning service. The reported impact is elevation of privilege. 2 of the 3 are described as server-side request forgery, or SSRF. The other is an open redirect issue in a trusted productivity context. This is not a tutorial, and it is not exploit coverage. It is a defender's map of where AI risk actually lives. This is Daily Tech Hack Global for July 5, 2026. The central thesis is simple: the AI security perimeter is no longer just prompt safety, it is the chain of trust across Copilot interfaces, model-serving APIs, cloud networking, identity provisioning, connectors, and permissions. The question this episode answers is, if an enterprise AI service can see documents, call internal systems, and rely on identity automation, what should defenders verify when a critical privilege boundary advisory appears? The payoff is practical. By the end, you should know why these advisories matter even without confirmed exploitation, what to check in a Microsoft Cloud and AI environment, and how to communicate risk without panic. First, the timeline and the evidence. The National Vulnerability Database lists CV 2026-41106 for Microsoft 365 Copilot, CV 2026-45499 for Azure OpenAI, and CV 2026-57100 for Microsoft Entra Provisioning Service. The related Microsoft Security Response Center pages list the same products and classify the issues as critical elevation of privilege vulnerabilities. During collection, the MSRC records did not indicate confirmed exploitation in the wild. The CISA known exploited vulnerabilities feed returned HTTP 403 from this automated environment, so I am not claiming CISA confirmed exploitation. That distinction matters. Defenders should move quickly because severity and product placement are serious, but they should not invent facts. The first advisory is CV 2026-41106 in Microsoft 365 Copilot. NVD and Microsoft describe an elevation of privilege issue associated with an untrusted URL redirect, commonly called open redirect. The MSRC score reflected by NVD is critical, 9.3. Open redirect can sound small compared with memory corruption or remote code execution, but in a modern productivity suite it affects a trust boundary that people interact with every day. Users recognize the environment, they trust the workflow, and they may be moving between documents, meetings, search results, email, and web pages without treating every transition as a security decision. Here is the defender-level explanation. A redirect bug does not automatically mean that every user is compromised. It means a trusted application may be able to move a user toward an untrusted destination in a way that weakens expectations. In an AI-assisted workflow, that trust matters even more. Copilot is not just a chat box. It can sit near organizational knowledge, shared files, meeting context, mail, and business processes. If a privileged user is sent through a confusing or misleading path, the consequences can include credential exposure, consent abuse, or a risky action that looks more legitimate than it should. So what should Copilot administrators check? Start with advisory status and service health guidance for Microsoft. Then review which users and groups have Copilot access, especially executives, administrators, developers, finance teams, and legal teams. Review conditional access, phishing-resistant authentication, safe link policies, app consent settings, and alerts around unusual sign-in behavior. Look for flows where a user is unexpectedly asked to authenticate again, approve a new application, or leave the expected corporate domain. The point is not to blame users. The point is to reduce the number of moments where users are forced to detect a subtle trust boundary failure alone. The second advisory is CV 2026-45499 in Azure OpenAI. NVD describes it as SSRF that may allow elevation of privilege over the network. The MSRC base score reflected in the record is critical, 9.9. I am intentionally avoiding routes, payloads, parameters, or operational exploitation detail. The safe explanation is enough for defenders. SSRF changes the question from, what can an attacker reach directly, to, what can the vulnerable server reach on their behalf? That is especially important in cloud AI. Azure OpenAI is often deployed as part of a larger application stack. A company may connect it to retrieval augmented generation, document indexes, storage accounts, private endpoints, API gateways, internal tools, logging platforms, content filters, and managed identities. The model service may appear as one piece of the design, but the business value comes from the connections around it. When a critical SSRF class advisory touches that layer, the urgent task is to inventory those connections and ask whether any identity or network path is broader than it needs to be. For cloud teams, the practical checklist is clear. Identify all Azure OpenAI resources, the applications that call them, and the identities those applications use. Check whether endpoints are public or private, whether network rules are restrictive, and whether managed identities can access storage, key vaults, databases, or internal APIs beyond their actual job. Review logs for unusual requests, unexpected failures, spikes in denied network calls, or access patterns that do not match normal application behavior. If Microsoft provides remediation or confirms server-side action, verify that your environment still follows least privilege after the vendor fix. The third advisory is CVE 2026-57100 in Microsoft Entra Provisioning Service. NVD describes it as SSRF with possible elevation of privilege over the network, and the severity reflected from Microsoft is critical, 9.9. This one is strategically important because provisioning is close to identity lifecycle. Provisioning creates, updates, synchronizes, and removes access. It touches users, groups, attributes, SaaS connectors, application assignments, joiner and leaver processes, and sometimes custom workflows. Identity is not just login anymore. It is the control plane for who gets access to what, how long they keep it, which applications trust them, and what automation happens when their role changes. If a critical advisory affects a provisioning service, defenders should not treat it as a niche backend issue. They should review recent provisioning events, group changes, new accounts, unexpected attribute updates, connector errors, failed synchronization jobs, application consent changes, and any sudden expansion of permissions. Again, the goal is not to assume compromise. The goal is to verify that the identity graph did not move in a way nobody approved. Now connect the three advisories. Copilot is the user-facing AI productivity layer. Azure OpenAI is the model and application platform layer. Entra Provisioning is the identity automation layer. Together they illustrate the real AI security perimeter. It includes interface trust, server-side request paths, private network boundaries, managed identities, application consent, connector scope, logs, and human workflows. If your AI governance program only asks whether prompts are safe, it is missing the infrastructure that gives those prompts business power. This is the midpoint payoff. The biggest lesson is not that AI creates a completely new category of magic risk. The lesson is that AI adoption concentrates existing cloud and identity risks into high-value workflows. The assistant is useful because it can reach data and tools. The retrieval system is useful because it can search documents. The automation is useful because it can call APIs. The identity layer is useful because it provisions access at scale. Each useful connection is also a place where a vulnerability, misconfiguration, or excessive permission can increase blast radius. What should security leaders do in the next 24 to 48 hours? First, assign ownership. Copilot issues may sit between endpoint, productivity, identity, and security awareness teams. Azure OpenAI may sit between cloud platform, application security, data, and machine learning teams. Entra Provisioning may sit between identity, HR systems, SaaS administrators, and security operations. If nobody owns the cross-boundary response, every team can assume another team checked it. Second, create an AI and identity exposure sheet. For each AI-enabled application, list the data sources it can access, the APIs it can call, the identity it uses, the network zones it can reach, the logs it creates, and the human approval points it depends on. This is not bureaucracy, it is incident response preparation. When a critical advisory appears, you should not spend the first day discovering which app uses which connector. Third, enforce least privilege where AI systems meet automation. Use separate identities for separate workloads. Avoid shared secrets that unlock broad resources. Prefer scoped managed identities, private endpoints where appropriate, explicit allow lists, and monitored egress paths. Do not give a model-connected service broad access just because it is convenient during a pilot. Pilots have a habit of becoming production before the permission model catches up. Fourth, make logs useful before the investigation. For Copilot and productivity workflows, monitor unusual sign-ins, risky user behavior, suspicious consent prompts, and domain transitions. For Azure OpenAI applications, capture application layer requests, denied network attempts, storage and key vault access, and changes to deployment configuration. For Entra provisioning, retain audit logs for group changes, connector changes, account creation, synchronization failures, and entitlement updates. Detection depends on having the right evidence before something happens. Fifth, communicate precisely. Tell executives and users what is known, what is not known, and what behavior to report. Known, Microsoft and NVIDIA list critical elevation of privilege advisories affecting Copilot, Azure OpenAI, and Entra provisioning service. Not claimed here, confirmed exploitation by CISA, because the feed could not be verified from this environment and the consulted Microsoft records did not show active exploitation at collection time. User action, report unexpected redirects, login prompts, consent screens, or unusual access notifications. Administrator action, verify advisory status, review exposure, tighten permissions, and monitor logs. There is also a regulatory angle. AI governance is increasingly about accountability, data access, auditability, and risk management. A critical security advisory in an AI or identity service is not only a patching event. It is evidence that organizations need a living inventory of AI systems, data flows, and third-party dependencies. If an auditor or board asks what Copilot can access, which Azure OpenAI apps can call internal systems, or how provisioning changes are reviewed, a security team should be able to answer without a week of archaeology. For developers building with LLMs and agents, the lesson is architectural. Treat every tool call as a security boundary. Treat every connector as a privilege decision. Treat retrieval results, plugin outputs, and workflow triggers as untrusted inputs until validated. Separate read-only tasks from write actions. Require explicit authorization for sensitive operations. Make the agent's identity narrower than the human's identity whenever possible. The safer design is not anti-AI, it is what makes AI safe enough to use in real business systems. For smaller organizations, the checklist is shorter but still important. Confirm whether you use Microsoft 365 Copilot, Azure OpenAI, or Entra provisioning. Review Microsoft guidance, check your tenant security notifications, and make sure administrators use phishing-resistant MFA. Limit public exposure, remove stale app consents, rotate old secrets, and review recent identity changes. If you rely on a managed service provider, ask them exactly which checks they performed and what evidence they reviewed. The answer to today's question is this: when an enterprise AI service can see documents, call internal systems, and rely on identity automation, a critical privilege boundary advisory should trigger more than a patch note. It should trigger a map. Map who has access. Map what the AI application can reach. Map which identities and connectors are involved. Map the logs that prove normal behavior. Then reduce the privileges that are not necessary. Final takeaway. Do not turn these advisories into hype, and do not dismiss them because the word AI sometimes gets overused. The AI angle is real here because Copilot, Azure OpenAI, and Entra sit across the productivity, model platform, and identity layers of modern enterprise computing. The defensive move is calm urgency, read the advisories, verify service status, reduce exposure, review permissions, monitor logs, and prepare your organization for the next time AI, cloud, and identity risk arrive in the same headline.